All right, everyone, welcome again to the COVID-19 and Local Arts Education Advocacy Training. This virtual training is hosted by the California Alliance for Arts Education and Arts for LA, and we are so happy to have you all with us today. Before we get going, I just wanted to do a few logistics. I want to point out the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Throughout, please feel free to pop your questions into that box, and we will take some time after the presentations to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. The chat feature is also right there to the right of the Q&A. And throughout the presentations, we will be putting some links to the resources mentioned, so keep an eye out for those links. I also want to mention that this training is going to be recorded and distributed in the coming days. So wonderful, I think we are ready to get going. It's my pleasure to now introduce Tom DeCaney, Executive Director of the California Alliance for Arts Education. Thank you, Tom, for setting the scene for us this morning.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Adelaide, and good morning, everybody. Based on the flurry in the chat box, it's great to see so many folks from around the state of California joining us today. I wish it was in a better environment, and I hope everybody is doing well and staying healthy given our current situation. But obviously, we're here today to make sure that we are fighting to make sure that every student in California receives the high quality, well-rounded education they need and deserves. So I'm thrilled to see people keep coming on to the chat, and if you are just joining us, please add your name and title if you're so willing. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the California Alliance for Arts Education. We are the statewide policy and advocacy organization that fights to ensure that every young person in the state of California gets a high quality arts education. And we're thrilled today to be here in partnership with our colleagues at Arts for LA, with Cordelia, who's been an on-the-ground partner in our fight for arts education across the state, and want to acknowledge our many other partners across the state that make this work possible. I know we have some representatives from the Arts Education Alliance of the Bay Area, from Create California, Californians for the Arts, and a number of our statewide partners. So really in this philosophy of advocacy on the ground, we know local communities are really the ones that know their communities and their schools best, and they're the best advocates. So while we're the statewide policy and advocacy organization, we only really can do our work because of you who are there in school board meetings, or now maybe virtually in a school board meeting, making sure that we're making the case for why the arts are so critical to a great education. I think it's important to acknowledge our moment. Obviously, we are in an unprecedented moment in the state of California and in the country. And I think we have to put forward the value of equity at the center of all of our work. At the Alliance, we have recently drafted a racial equity statement of purpose. And we know for a fact that many students are being left behind because of the digital divide and who has access to technology at home, as we have had to quickly adjust what public education looks like in the state of California. So one of the values we're bringing forward today is really keeping equity at the center of our work, remembering that not everybody has access to learning from home, and that the digital divide is very real. So I think one of the philosophies that you'll see today in our presentation is ensuring that we keep that in mind when we're advocating for this coming year in education, but the years ahead as well. We have many safety issues in schools, many access to technology issues, and a good arts education is only going to be as good as reaching every one of those students who might benefit from distance learning and other great innovations that are happening in the face of great adversity. I wanted to just quickly address the state budget picture, but I will let Cordelia go into this in more depth in a moment. But clearly the economic picture in the state of California is quite grim, and many local communities were already grappling with reduced allocations for public education. So we're in for a long fight. There's some immediate hits coming in many districts across the state, but we want to be ready, and that's why we're here today, is to provide some tools based on what we've learned over the years, and hopefully allowing you to adapt them into your local communities, and to call on all of us for technical assistance support in helping you, the local advocates, make sure that we're protecting high quality, well-rounded arts education for every student in California. I think a couple things to note. The state budget picture, as I mentioned, is pretty grim, with a 2-year reduction of looking to be about $19 billion. and I'll let Cordelia speak more to that. But also a lot of local triggers from general funds are being pulled in terms of reductions. So I know in San Francisco, the Children's Fund allocation is being threatened. So really getting to understand these sources of funding for public education in your community are very critical to making a very particular ask. So I think one of the things we've seen as a high quality strategy in advocacy is what I like to call the power of the particular. So know what you're asking for, be specific. The arts are a part of the ed code. It's a requirement that schools provide them. We do not need to be apologetic in this moment. But we do need to be understanding, and we need to understand that schools and school districts and school board members are making some incredibly difficult decisions. And they're humans and they're volunteers in most instances. So let's be kind in our advocacy and remember that they're making very difficult decisions. And that while we know the arts are essential to a high quality education, so are safe buildings and toilet paper and all the many things that schools are fighting for resources for, and that we're there as partners. So, but we do believe in a very particular ask. So while it's great to say the arts are essential or save the arts, it's best to go into the conversation with some very specific asks about how we're going to fund the arts. Things like using Title I funding, various strategies you're going to hear today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our colleague at Arts for LA, Cordelia Estelle, who's going to give a bit of an overview of the state budget picture and provide some initial tools for advocacy. I also, before I do that, want to really welcome Summer McBride from the Culver School District for joining us today. We're so thrilled to have a president of the school board who's in the front lines of this difficult work, and look forward to hearing from you as well today. So with that, I will turn it over to Cordelia.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. Great. So I'm going to go back into the presentation. Just give me 1 second while I share my screen. Fantastic. Again, so thrilled to be here with the Alliance, just incredible partners in the movement to ensure every child has access to a high quality arts instruction. That is their right, according to California State Education Code. Arts for LA is a regional, cross-sector, cross-discipline advocacy organization representing LA and the greater LA County region. I'm the director of organizing, so really focusing on community organizing, engagement, and outreach, and really passionate about the arts ed work, which is a key pillar of Arts for LA's policy platform. So it's a little bit about me and us, and I'm going to dive in just because we have a ton to get through and not so much time. And I really want to make sure we have time for the incredible questions that folks have already submitted, as well as to hear from Summer. And the reality that school board members are facing on the front lines, as Tom articulated. So quickly, the reality, and I'll be really honest, the reality changes almost moment to moment, day to day. Every time I make a slide about the budget process at the state level, it's out of date by an hour or two later, to be very frank. So, and there are folks on this call who may have even more particular or specific knowledge about some of these details. But I want to make sure that we're all having a sort of a broad overview, a clear understanding of the reality, which, as Tom mentioned, is frankly pretty grim. So we know that the state budget shows a 13% reduction for public education of a little over $10 billion. And that's coming down in a numerous ways, as Tom also mentioned, but in two main ways that I think are going to affect arts education or impact arts education most severely. And that is a 10% reduction in the local control funding formula. So that is a huge amount of the funding that goes to local school districts. And is based, again, it's a hyper-local issue, right? So it's based on an algorithm that really assesses need of each school district and the various needs of students in those school districts. So that overall funding source is going down by 10%. The other thing I just wanted to pop out and highlight is that there are we're looking at $3 to $3.5 million in cuts through K through 12 categorical programs. K-12 categorical programs, I think, is a way that a lot of other arts ed work is funded, especially through the community-based organization lane, because the K through 12 categorical programs, that includes career technical education, which is the way things like animation, right? A lot of career sort of pathways from high school, secondary, schools are funded, and that's looking at some pretty large cuts. K-12 categorical programs also include after-school programs, which we know a lot of students access arts instruction through that after-school programming, and then workforce development as well. So that's sort of this large overview reality. Briefly, the timeline. Another slide, to be very frank, that its shelf life is short, shall we say. But to run through quickly, again, the sort of broad strokes timeline of the state budget. May 15th, so a little over a week and a half ago, or was it 2 weeks ago, was what sort of insiders call the May revise, right? Which is the governor's revision to the proposed budget in January. Obviously, the proposed budget in January is going to look very different than the revised budget in May, given that there was a world-changing event in the interim. And the May revise is sort of where these projected numbers I shared with you in the last slide are coming from. So that happened on May 15th. Typically, in a normal year, the legislature has to adopt that budget by June 15th. That's a little different this year because the IRS has extended tax filing deadlines until July 15th, as opposed to April 15th. So California doesn't really know how much money it has and won't until mid-July, right? Which is what's making this process a little different this year. One of the many things making this process a little different this year, right? So then we come to late August, which is when the budget will really be finalized. Now, as many of you probably know, as savvy arts education and education equity advocates, that this was a year for the development of the new local control accountability plans. And that again is a sort of guiding document, a strategic plan really for a school district for 3 years, the coming 3 years. It gets revised every year, but every 3 years, a new one is developed, with leaders, decision makers at various local school districts in tandem with the community and stakeholders. And typically that LCAP, right, so the local control and accountability plan, is adopted and implemented in July. That deadline has been extended just because, again, school districts, the situation is so fluid and school districts are facing just a series of challenges in terms of even just knowing how much revenue is going to be coming in from a local level and from the state level. Now, the other piece I really quickly want to mention too about the timeline is we know school districts, right? This looks like sort of we have months, but we know school districts are already having to make really hard decisions because local sources of funding, maybe a local measure, a local parcel tax that was introduced, those revenues are all over the place, right? Those revenue streams now are also affected by COVID-19 and the public health crisis. So we're already seeing school districts making these choices. I'm sure you guys are seeing them on the ground as well. So the time to be arts advocates is now. And it's going to be scattered right across the coming months for various districts. And I think that's one thing I just want to emphasize before we go into this presentation in a little more detail is the beauty and the curse of the local control funding model that California has adopted means there is no single letter campaign, there is no single tweet, there is no single phone call that can really affect change across the state and across all the school districts in California. This is hyper-local work. These decisions are being made at a hyper-local level, obviously all affected by this state level decision-making. But that's why this group of people who have taken time to join this webinar are so crucial to ensuring that students have access to the arts and that the arts are leveraged. The full power of the arts is leveraged in addressing the myriad issues that are going to be are facing our school districts in the coming months, because this is hyper-local work. Great, so quick overview of the process again. As I just said, school district budgets are being affected now. And it is possible for us to intervene. It can feel huge and like there's not much we can do about it, but there is action we can take, and that's why we're all here. So the first thing, and what we're really going to be focusing on throughout this training is engaging your school board, because in the coming months, these decisions really, again, are going to be made by local school board members and by, in tandem with superintendents, in tandem with community stakeholders. And Summer, I know will speak to this in more depth and with the wisdom of personal experience as well. But that's why we're focusing on advocacy surrounding school board meetings, school board agendas, and the hard choices that are going to be being discussed at those meetings in the coming months, inevitably. So the first thing is being able to find the agenda, read the agenda, and get ready for the meeting based on what you see in the agenda, right? Your school board meeting agenda. And within California, there's a 72-hour rule, right? These agendas do have to be posted 72 hours ahead of the meeting that they are outlining. This means that the turnaround is fast, right, to get organized and get prepared. So that's, again, really, we're trying to give you tools that just will help you sort of front load as much as you can this advocacy, so that when you do see something that you want to speak to, that you want to work with your school board on, you have the tools ready, they're outlined, you have a little bit, you have a plan that's probably 75% baked, let's say, and you're really ready to hit the ground running. Because while there is this window, it is a small window. So we have to really be proactive in this moment, prepared, and ready to act effectively. So I want to quickly also go over sort of the case for arts education in a crisis, right? I think and we, again, as Tom said, acknowledge that everyone on this call is the expert in their particular district and their particular community. But some general messaging, I think, that really is helpful in making the case right now. Again, in this context, we have to be context specific with our messaging. And I think we have to, as Tom said, position ourselves as partners in pursuit of a solution, right? And we want to make the case that the arts are a solution, right? Not only to the myriad issues facing school districts now in this moment, but also, you know, in support of the outcomes that school board members may have been fighting for the 4 years of their term, right? So again, we are partners. The arts are part of a solution. They can support numerous outcomes that everyone wants to see, right? That's number one. So it's a general frame and positioning ourselves as part of a solution, partners. An example, I love this series of statistics, right? I think it's a really simple one. The 543 makes it really easy to remember. And it's a really good example of sort of this frame in action. I pull this from Create California and another incredible statewide partners advocacy poster, which if you haven't downloaded and saved to your desktop for easy reference, I highly recommend doing. But again, this is just a sort of illustration of that larger frame. We know that students receiving arts instruction are 5 times less likely to drop out, right? So they're engaged in a way that students who do not have access to art often are not. And we know many school districts are looking at their matriculation rates and really trying to bring those up, right? And arts is a way to do that. It is part of a solution. 4 times more likely, excuse me, to be acknowledged for academic achievement, right? 3 times more likely to earn a bachelor's degree. So if we're looking at career readiness, we're looking at college readiness, the arts support that. And I think, again, if we're taking this COVID specific, right, engagement right now is all over the map, is sort of what I'm hearing from our various partners and community. Some students are more engaged and enabled to lean into distance learning. We know that distance learning is also widening and illuminating the digital divide, right? So it's revealing a lot of things and a lot of inequities that were there and present in our system, highlighting them in new ways. But I think we can make a strong case for the arts to engage and retain students who might be disengaging because distance learning perhaps is not their natural way of learning and processing new information. And then last but not least, and this I will also sort of an informal cite of source is the incredible work of Ping Ho and at UCLA, Arts and Healing. This is a sort of a nugget I have lifted from her presentation and her work that I find really, really, really useful when talking about arts ed. We know the arts are a powerful tool for addressing trauma. Recent rigorous studies have shown the arts decrease stress and thus enable learning, right? We know that if there is a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress happening in a student's brain and their heart. It's very difficult for them to process new information. And the arts are a way of addressing that head on. And last but not least, sometimes school board members, and this has been my experience, school board members, not all school board members know that the arts are core curricula. You know, it hasn't always been true. It's not true in every state. California Education Code, I think, is really pioneering in this way of saying, yes, this is core curricula. So always a friendly reminder that, you know, this is part of core curricula. We are required to provide students with this arts instruction. This always can be a useful reminder. Great. So the plan, as I said, we need to be proactive. We need to be prepared. We need to be vigilant. Because these decisions are going to be coming fast and quickly. They are going to be frank, often be buried in the school board agendas. It's our job to be on top of those agendas, to pick out the items that are going to impact arts ed, and then also very quickly to figure out a way to address sort of those items in a school board agenda in a way that, again, is in partnership, is supporting the outcomes everyone wants to see as our educational communities are faced with really, really, really difficult decisions. And that's a heavy lift. I'm not gonna pretend it's easy. It's not. And that's why, again, we're sort of walking through these like really basic tools to sort of help folks just have like just a jump start into this 72-hour turnaround that's often going to happen. And there are ways to extend that turnaround, you know, developing relationships with your school board members, with your decision makers, your superintendent, but generally to the public, you know, it's that 72-hour turnaround of this item is on the agenda before it is brought up at the meeting. So before we even talk about that meeting, right, we need to know who is making the decisions. We need to know when the decisions are being made, and we need to think about how we can influence these decisions. And that's really what we're going to be going through the rest of the presentation. I'm going to be running through quickly some basic tools around articulating the who is making the decisions and ways to make sure we are on top of the timeline, that we don't miss something that is really going to severely impact arts ed in our district. And then I will kick it over to the incredible California Alliance team to talk through some concrete strategies and tools for engaging school board and decision makers around these issues. So these are two pieces that I'm highlighting. I think these are slightly old versions, so forgive me, but there are two documents that we have developed at Arts for LA and are making available to you. We will drop them in the chat at the end of the session. It will be in emails. They will be made accessible to you. They are downloadable PDFs and or Excel sheets, whatever, you know, sort of is easiest for you to use. Basically just to have all this information, all the things you need to respond effectively and quickly in one place, so that when it's go time, you're ready, right? And you're not having to go through a ton of emails or search the internet or sort of start from scratch, that you're 50 to 60% of the way there. It's just time to sort of put this plan into action. So the first thing I'm going to walk through is the advocacy dashboard, and that's really tracking this when. Right, so this is the top little piece of the advocacy dashboard. It's right here, fillable fields. And you're looking at three things. The school board meeting info, when is it? Every other Tuesday? Is it once a month? It's going to totally vary district by district. When is the next meeting? And is there an agenda item that is pertinent to arts education or whatever, education equity, whatever I want to advocate around? The other resources that I've included here is the California dashboard. And hold on, I'm going to stop sharing just for a second so I can share that with you. The California State dashboard is a really incredible tool. Do folks, and then quickly in the chat, if you are familiar with the California dashboard, just put a plus sign in the chat so I can see. Great. So yes, I'm seeing lots of folks are. Yep, great. So really quickly for those who aren't, this again is a sort of messaging, a positioning thing for as you're preparing your advocacy, right? It's really important to know what is on the minds of your school board members, right? Because if they're really focused on a sort of large and what has potentially been an intractable issue in their district, such as graduation rates, right? And you're coming in talking about arts education, and it's sort of, it's over here when they're really focused on these goals that they've been potentially working for through their 4 years of their term. It's really, really helpful to come in and sort of be speaking the same language, be on the same page about the goals and the priorities. The sort of 2.0, the 201 version of this would be to really dig into the local control and accountability plan, or the LCAP. And that is like the strategic plan, the guiding document for the district's priorities. However, you might not have time. It's a 200-page document often. It's pretty complicated. And the dashboard is a really, really, really simple way of sort of it's really a snapshot of what the district is focusing on, where it sort of needs to lean in to different criteria. And so without further ado, someone already dropped it in the chat. Amazing. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. Caitlin, thank you. To take a look at that. And I will bring it up right now. Fantastic. And share my screen again. Great. So this is it. It's California School Dashboard. I can come here. I can type in my school district. So I'll type in Garvey School District. Oh, no results found. Let's try, there we go. So let's look at Garvey Elementary. And right here, up comes chronic absenteeism, suspension rate, English language arts, mathematics. So the criteria are standard. They change a little elementary, secondary, high school, right? But they're standard across the school districts. And right here, you can sort of get a sense of what potentially the priorities are going to be of the school board members you're going in to talk to. If you see that chronic absenteeism is in the red or orange realm, right? You know, that's something that maybe you can make a case for. Go back to that. Students with access to arts instruction are 5 times less likely to drop out. They're more engaged, right? So again, it's just a simple tool to help you position arts education as a solution. And the first step of that is a solution to what, right? This is a good place to identify what solutions are potentially needed in your district. So I just wanted to uplift that if folks weren't aware of it. The other thing that I want to uplift now, and Caitlin, again, if there's a link you can drop in, is Create California's data sheet project. They have an incredible wealth of resources, Create California does, on district by district metrics, measures, how the arts, where the arts education is in sort of every school district across California. It's an incredible, incredible resource. And it also has a really great and succinct tutorial on how to use data when you are talking to school board members, which I find just really, really useful, really succinct, and a great resource. So I want to uplift that as well. All right, I'm going to push on because I want to make sure we get through everything. So forgive me as I really, there we go. Okay, cool. So we're tracking the when, right? You're going to your school board. You're really, what you're doing is you're Googling your school district. You're clicking on the district link. And then it can be really tricky in that website to find when the next meeting is. That information actually can be kind of tricky to identify. So you're looking for a couple things. There are a couple ways to home in on it. You're looking for board, anything that says Board of Education, board meeting, board agenda. Click that, and that will often take you to a link that will take you to a page where you can access the agenda, and then you can also access when the next meeting is going to be. And I highly recommend putting it in this dashboard so that you don't have to go through that process of Googling and finding it and sort of macheting through the weeds. This also makes it really shareable so that if maybe you have a little bit more time or someone in your community has more time to lead this advocacy, you can easily share that information so folks can check in at a central place. And you're not asking everyone to sort of go off on their own and figure out where the agenda is, have trouble downloading the PDF. No, you're just linking to it simply here. The next step is to identify your key decision makers. Again, we're talking about school board members. We're talking about superintendents in another time, and potentially not in another time if your advocacy needs are different and you're really maybe even concentrating on a single school. It's a principal. It could be any number of folks, but having everyone's contact information, who they are, how to reach them most efficiently, and then their Facebook, Twitter as well, in one place will save you a ton of time in that 72-hour window when you don't have a lot of time to go track down everyone's numbers. So 5 to 10 minutes front loaded will make you so much more effective when the time comes over the coming months. This is a big thing, big piece of it, right, is your go team, right? You want your go team speed dial. Who is with you on this? Having their contact information in one place, also super useful. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to use this speed dial, even though I think the pink is lovely and it makes me smile a little bit, which we can always use in our advocacy moments. It could look like a group email. It can look like any number of things, but articulating who your go team is, who's going to help you when it's time to mobilize and activate, and having everyone's contact in one place is really important in terms of the front loading. Also encourage you to think about what those students are, who those students are, right? Because the student voice in this is key. Caitlin and Adelaide are going to get into that in way more depth, but having that information and that contact information also ready to go, key. And then I encourage you to think creatively about allies and press contacts. And by thinking creatively, I mean, I think we know who sort of the obvious allies might be. It's probably the arts organization, right? Maybe arts ed isn't their central issue, but they care deeply about it. You know, the Orange County Alliance for the Arts or Arts for LA, right? As an example of that sort of organization. Press contacts, think creatively. Obviously your local newspaper, a larger newspaper, an online publication, but I also encourage you to think creatively in terms of like student journalists, right? Like who's gonna write and cover this topic. Expand sort of beyond just the potential letter to the editor model, and think creatively. So the rapid response plan we're moving into, that was the advocacy dashboard. You have all your ducks in a row. They're ready to go. They're sitting there. You can copy and paste that information into emails. You're ready to go. It's time to develop your rapid response plan. Before you do that, a quick advocacy checklist, things I think everyone should do right now, if you want, as we're on this call. Set up a Google News alert for your school district, because even if you are checking in weekly on your school board agenda, you're going to go on vacation at some point. Something's going to come up and you're potentially going to forget to do it one day. And if there is big news in your school district, a simple Google News alert can alert you to the fact that action needs to be taken in swiftly. So I highly recommend doing that. And then a calendar reminder, because we forget these things. We really, again, I wish there were an answer to this work that was as simple as a single letter, a single tweet. There's not. These decisions, again, are made at a hyper-local level. In order for us to be effective, we need folks on the ground who are checking these agendas regularly, alerting their communities and the larger community as well. We're here to support you when there is something that's potentially impacting arts education, and digging in. So setting up a reminder, you got to find out when your board meeting is, and you got to set up that reminder to check it 72 hours before that meeting, right? When that agenda is going to be released. So if the meeting is every second Tuesday, right? You're setting up that reminder for Thursday, Friday to be looking for that agenda. Try reaching out to your board members and their staff, depending on how big your district is, if they have staff. I mean, again, I know that some of the bigger districts do, but most do not, right? So, but building those relationships before you're going into these meetings in full-on advocacy mode is going to be really, really helpful. And then again, check your advocacy dashboard, your CA dashboard, right? Great, so the next step is meeting with a team. Let's see, something is triggered on an agenda. I've included this here. Again, you guys are the experts on your district, so don't want to be overly prescriptive. This is an exercise I go through anytime I'm organizing a campaign as an organizer with Arts for LA. And it really helps in terms of clearly articulating for the whole team, your whole go team, what is trying to be accomplished. What's the goal? What's the outcome you want? And again, as Tom emphasized, this is really where it's for you guys to get strategic. Yes, no cuts to the arts. Like, yes, that's great, but let's be more specific about how we can be solution oriented. What is the cut to? It's to a CTE program. Okay, what's the solution? We want to think about arts integration as an alternative, right? Like really honing in on what that outcome is key, so that when you go in, you have a specific ask, and you really sort of, everyone's on the same message about what the goal is. This exercise is really about getting everyone together as much as it is about like Machiavellian strategy, right? The target, who has the power to affect that outcome, is it the school board member? In this context of COVID-19 budget cuts, most likely, that's where those decisions are being made. Strategy, what's the best way to influence them? Is it a conversation? You know, it's not necessarily like going on blast on Twitter, right? It could be think strategically about the best way to influence and get your point across. And then tactics, right? So what actions are you going to take to execute that strategy? And that is what we're going to get into in a second with Caitlin and Adelaide. They have a whole toolkit full of sort of ready-made, rubber meets the road tactics. But I find it really helpful to articulate my rapid response along these 4 questions. Sometimes I'll put it into a sentence, as I have there for you. In order to blank, we will influence blank by blank using blank, right? But sometimes the 4-question format is easier as well. And then feel free to use it, feel free to not. Just some project tracking, who's doing what, what's the deadline? Again, sort of like keeping track of the process of that advocacy as well within a 72-hour time period. You might be saying, let's try and get a meeting with this school board member. They're not answering, they don't want to talk. Okay, then we're going to write a letter to the editor, right? So the mapping out that timeline based on whatever strategy you decide is going to be key. And then assessment and reflection always, right? Great, so without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to the Alliance, the incredible Alliance team. Thank you, and feel free to ask some questions in Q&A, and I will do my best to respond to them. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cordelia, for that. I'm now going to introduce the Alliance's new suite of advocacy tools that we're calling the Local Advocacy Toolkit. You can see there are 6 elements of this toolkit, and we are going to tell you very briefly about each one of these tools, but our hope is they really don't need all that much explanation. We think that you'll be able to pick these up and use them and get going. So Cordelia, if you could switch to the next slide. Thank you. So this, the first item in the toolkit is a letter template to school board members that you can customize and send to both your school board members and the superintendent of your school district. And the letter positions you, as we've discussed, positions you as a supporter of the district, which is really important, and outlines how the arts can address the needs of students during this really difficult time. And you can send this letter as an individual, but it is more powerful if you can find partners to sign on to the letter with you. So when you're thinking about partners, you could, for example, ask your local PTA, maybe arts education nonprofits or education foundations, or even local businesses. Really anyone who supports arts education in schools, and you can ask them to sign on to this letter with you and put logos on the top, and that shows that you've built a coalition and there are many people who are supporting the messages in this letter. Next, Cordelia, we have, thank you. Next, we have a set of talking points that are specifically tailored to our current moment and focus on the social emotional benefits of arts education and jobs created by the creative economy. These talking points will be very familiar because Cordelia has hit several of them already in her presentation. And they can be used to create a presentation during the public comment period of a school board meeting, or they can be used and inserted into the letter template as you see fit. Next is the tips for effective public comment. This resource will help you decide what to include in your presentation and provides pointers for before, during, and after your presentation. And the content for this resource was in large part contributed by our next speaker, Summer McBride. And it is a delight to introduce you to Summer McBride, who's the president of the Culver City Board of Education. She was appointed to the Board of Education in March 2017 and then elected for a full term in November 2018. She has served on the Culver City Council of PTA's Executive Board, her district's Equity Advisory Council, and successfully completed the California School Board Association Masters in Governance program. Summer has 5 children enrolled in the Culver City Unified School District and therefore clearly has a vested interest in making schools the very best they can be. And she believes that an exceptional public school education is not a privilege, but a right for every student. And so thank you so much, Summer. I will now turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and really just for your advocacy. I'm so grateful. As you mentioned, I do have 5 children in the district. I have 5 sons. One is in kindergarten, one is 5th grade. I have a 7th grader, a 9th grader, and a 10th grader. And they have all been involved in the arts at some point in their education. And we make art a part of our family. They paint, they draw, they sing, they dance, they play music, all of the things that we want our children to do. And it's how they learn, it's how they grow, it's how they develop their social skills and so many other skills. And so I just want to thank you for the advocacy that you do for arts in California. From a school board perspective, it does get a bit tricky. Adelaide and I had a great conversation prior to this one when she first reached out to me. And I wasn't exactly sure what I had to offer because from a school board perspective, right now, our focus really is on how do we save jobs, how do we save positions, how do we save people, how do we save programs while also keeping our students safe. And we just had a board meeting last night and we're talking about the budgets and all of the numbers that Cordelia shared. It's a very real challenge for us, but the truth is, as the situation changes, every school board has a set of goals or core values that they rely on to guide their decisions. And as situations like COVID-19 present themselves, we as board members have to be responsible to know that our methods may change, but those core values have to stay the same. And so what is really important when you're interacting with school boards is to sort of place back in front of them what those goals were that they set out to achieve, what those core values are that they wanted to maintain, because that's where you're going to be able to sort of ground them in their commitment to their students. And I hate to put it this way, but you're going to turn their words on them and say, this is what you committed to. If innovation, so in Culver City, there are 5 board members, and we came together over the course of several meetings and said that our core values were going to include student-centered accountability and innovation and equity and partnership, and all of these things are really important. And as things change with our funding and as things change with our environment, we have to go back to those core values. And so that's where the school boards are really going to have to sort of prove themselves. We all know that arts integration is done pretty much every day, but when it's singled out, it seems to become a burden on budgets. Meanwhile, teachers, gen ed, special ed teachers, elementary, secondary, they've all integrated art in some way in their classrooms. And as Cordelia mentioned, it is the solution. It's not the end, it's the means to the end, because school boards have areas that we govern. So there are 5, just to give you a little bit of background for those who don't know, there are 5 areas that school boards are charged with governing, and they include facilities, the budget, the curriculum, personnel, and student discipline. And in those 5 areas, curriculum and the budget are the 2 main areas where you can really drive home the importance of making sure that arts is really in the forefront of those conversations, because there are so many new curricula that have come out that do integrate arts, where it doesn't have to be an add-on or an and then, but it is part of the curriculum that is being presented to students. And that's one way that you can help make sure that this doesn't become a separate burden, but it is part of what is being offered through the curriculum. And even with those 5 areas, there's a ton of pressure on boards to balance the obligations. There are people and programs, and then there are facilities, and the funding that comes through into school districts are broken up and can only be spent on some of those things. So if you have a school district that has a parcel tax, those funds from that parcel can only go to cover, and this is one easy way of remembering it, parcel taxes cover people and programs. And if you have a district that has a huge bond measure that passes, that bond can only cover buildings. So the capital improvements that are funded by the bond measures can only be used to provide capital improvements, the actual physical buildings. But we've used our bond money to create a ceramics room. We are using some of the leftover bond money to create a space for dance. We've used some of the bond money to create art rooms at the different schools, including and some maker spaces. So that's one way that budgets, that the school boards can influence the physical building being more conducive to arts integration, but the larger percentage of the money that comes into any school district goes to the people and programs. And that's where it becomes really tricky, because you're trying to figure out, how do we maintain all of these core subjects? How do we meet all of these state standards while also ensuring that our students are doing it in a way that makes them want to come to school? And for so many students, the arts is what drives them to school. So it is imperative for boards to understand and figure out how to integrate art so that we don't sacrifice the very thing that is a huge motivator for so many of our students. Even if the students don't realize that that art is helping with their cognition, with their social emotional development, with their, a ton of improved skills, the students just know, I love art and this is what I want to do. And this is the motivator for me being at school. School districts need to understand that, because it can address some of the concerns that we have. But school boards do need your help, and Cordelia alluded to it. A lot of school boards, most school boards are made up of average people who come from every background. On our school board in particular, we have a rocket scientist, literally. He works for JPL. We have a neuroscientist. We have an educator. We have someone who has a counseling background. And then I work for a nonprofit community clinic teaching parenting classes. So none of us are really experts in the arts, though. None of us are expert educators for K-12. And so when you present to boards, you're educating the board. And the people in the district who are arts advocates are educating the board, because there's a lot that we don't know. We come together and we use our collective goals to achieve the district goals, but a lot of times we don't understand the importance of what you're presenting. I know that I've learned a ton about arts and the importance of arts integration from our own arts district coordinator, Heather Moses. She has taught me so much. I consider her a really great friend, but she's also a leader in our district when it comes to arts advocacy and helping us understand what it means to really provide opportunities for students to develop their skills. So you can influence the school boards by being that source of education. And most school board members I've met really do want to learn more, because we understand that coming into this job, there's no onboarding process. I went through the CFBA Masters in Governance course, which was like 5 days of training, but still you could be a school board member for 20 years and still not figure out, how to effectively do this job, given the constant changes from, being underfunded by the state and federal government. So there's a ton that we can learn from arts advocates. And many board members do think that they understand the importance of the arts, but they don't really know the depth of the importance of the arts. So as Cordelia mentioned, you can educate yourself on what the district's goals are, and then align those goals with the importance of arts integration and how that can help. And it's not, like I said, it's not the end, it's the means to the end. So it is going to help with the improved cognition, the problem solving. There are a lot of buzzwords now that are coming up in education, like cultural proficiency, equity, restorative practices. They're important in my district. They're coming up in if you research any of the more recent articles about shifts in public education, you'll hear a lot about cultural responsive education or cultural proficiency and restorative practices, but a lot of districts honestly don't know how to make that shift. They don't know how to actually move towards those things. And arts is the perfect way to bring in some of those elements so that it becomes more of the strategic plan for the district and not just a buzzword. And so when we talk about equity, we know that there are a ton of parent organizations. The PTA was mentioned, but there are a ton of parent organizations that actually fund and help augment their arts programs in their districts, but that creates a lot of inequities. And so imperative, it's on the district to make sure that there is parity when it comes to the experiences that the children are receiving, that the students are receiving. And so if you have affluent areas or schools or sites that can fund additional arts programs, and you have in that same district schools that are not able to do that, really it falls in the district's lap to make sure that there is some equity in the experience that the students are getting. So that's another way that you can sort of bring it back to the district and say, this is your goal. You said that equity is a core value, or you've put it in your LCAP, or you've said that these are the things that you want to provide to all students in your district. Well, we see that there are some gaps, and we can help you fill those gaps by, you know, making sure that the arts is integrated at every level. Schools are also moving towards inclusion. It's a big move in our district. Inclusion is when there is no longer a separation between students who have IEPs and students who don't, or students who have 504s and students who don't. Students are being integrated into one classroom. So the gen ed learners, the students who have IEPs, are all learning in the same environment. And that move towards inclusion is really important. But there are some elements of that that can make it difficult for the students who have IEPs, who are being moved into an environment that doesn't always become conducive to their learning. And so arts therapy can be beneficial. There's so much scientific evidence that arts therapy can be great for students who have autism, students who have ADHD, students who have learning disabilities or emotional disturbances. And those are all challenges for school districts, because the special education in most districts is grossly underfunded. In our own district, I think we get about $5 million in supplemental funding for special education, but we spend about 3 times that much. And we're spending so much because we're trying to figure out, and in some ways it's unfortunate, but we're trying to figure out how to put a square peg into a round hole, and that it's not fair to the students, it's not fair to their families, it's not fair to the teachers. And so school boards have to look at that and say, well, what can we do? What can we bring in that's going to create an equitable experience for all of these students, whether they have an IEP, a 504 or not? And arts therapy, arts integration is one of those ways. And so that's how you can help boards know that, like, this is not just about helping students, this is also about being better stewards over your budget. This is how you maximize your budget. You don't have to do an add-on if it's integrated into what you're already doing. If you provide it in the professional development, schools need art teachers because art teachers are trained in that core subject. They absolutely need art teachers. They need, music teachers and vocal teachers and all of those things. But there's also a way to integrate it through the professional development that teachers of other subjects are able to teach, so that there's a partnership amongst the staff. And we all know that there's a way to train the trainers. And so you have arts teachers who are very well versed in this core subject that can also, and I know there are plenty of art teachers who are willing to work with other core subject teachers to help them integrate that. Bless you. So it's important for us to understand that when we approach school boards, that their mind may not be anywhere remotely focused on art because of the gravity of everything else we have to deal with. So I would really encourage you to not only figure out what's going to be on the agenda, but make your end goal to have a board member or a couple board members give some nodding heads to agendize a formal, more robust discussion about the arts in their district. Because that's where the changes will actually happen. If you give a great 3-minute speech or public comment, and you have board members who are mildly interested, but once those public comments are over, I'll be honest with you, depending on what else we have on that agenda, we may not revisit those wonderful words that you spoke. I'm just being really honest, and to be brutally honest, and not to disrespect any of my personal colleagues, but I know of, I've been in different spaces with board members, sometimes their focus is not even on the public comment that's being made at that time. So the email leading up to the public comment, the email following up the public comment is really important, because in that moment you may not have their undivided attention. And also, if you can, during your public comment, make an appeal to have an actual discussion agendized. And that way there can be back and forth. For those of you who don't know, when the public comment is made on items not on the agenda, board members are not allowed to respond. That's actually a law that we have to abide by, because it prevents us from engaging in a discussion, a formal discussion about something that maybe other members of the public wanted to be able to give their input on. But if we all of a sudden start engaging back and forth during public comment, and that's not an agendized item, we've broken the law, and we've really also broken the public's trust, because maybe someone is watching and saying, well, I would have loved to have been able to make a comment about that. So you really want the school boards to agendize that discussion. That way there can actually be a dialogue. There can be questions asked, and there can be, plans discussed, and solutions, generated in that dialogue. And also it helps if you know of a board member who has a particular interest in the arts. All school boards have bios. Most of the time they have bios. One thing I did, even before I got on the school board, when I was thinking about joining, I went back and watched a ton of videos. My colleagues kind of think I'm crazy because I still watch videos of other school boards just to know what they're discussing, what challenges they're facing, how they're dealing with it. And so you can really get a feel for how school boards operate, and how every school board sort of has a personality, and you can get a feel for their personality, and also get some idea of which one of these school board members can I really reach out to and become sort of an ally or a partner with. So when I do make that 3-minute public comment, I can rely on them to turn to their colleagues and say, hey, can we agendize a discussion about this in the future? And a lot of times it happens right on the spot. You get a couple nodding heads. It's not a vote that has to be taken. And before you know it, it can be agendized. With most school boards, the president has the ability to make a unilateral decision to agendize pretty much any discussion. With our school board, if you have 2 or more board members that want to agendize a discussion, we will agendize it. So just find out the ways that the board that you're presenting to decides on how things make it onto the agenda, and then go from there. But in many ways, it's important to help school boards understand that what you're advocating for, they're already doing in so many ways. It just may not be in such a formal way that they have, like in our district, I mentioned Heather Moses. Because of her, we have this incredible strategic arts plan. A lot of districts don't have that, but the arts are actually happening in their classrooms. And so if you ask any teacher, if there's a lesson that your students don't particularly like, how do you make it fun? And a lot of them will say, well, turn it into a song, or turn it into a dance, or turn it into a poem or a piece of art. Well, that's the arts integration, but if it's not formalized, then we can lose that as the standards change or as the goals change, because of the limited time that our teachers will have with our students, for the foreseeable future. And then one other thing that I would encourage you to do is help the districts help you. Because districts will say, well, we don't have the funding for arts. Arts is not something that's a big part of our budget right now. It can be if they're actually helping you advocate for more funding on their behalf. And in order to do that, you do need from the district some support. You need the data that they have. Not just the dashboard data is a great place to start, but school districts tend to capture their own data internally that can speak even more to their LCAP goals or their overall goals. Whether it's to address their own desire to improve the chronic absenteeism, or their own goals for the graduation rates, or to even get more students into AP and honors classes. Collecting that data from the districts and saying, give me your data, let me know how arts is helping you achieve these goals, and I'll take this data and I'll take it to potential partners in the community who can maybe be funders for more arts integration. So it really is, it can be a symbiotic relationship where it's not like, the advocates are saying, hey, district, we want to push this into your lap and have you figure out, what's going on. It can be, help us help you, because we know what your goals are, and we have some connectors that we can, some connections that we can make from our own pool of partners, so that we can get additional funding. In Culver City, we actually have a ton of partners, and we have a great partnership with Sony. They do donate money, but even more so than the funds they donate experiences for our students. Our film students are able to, before COVID-19, they were able to have their film screenings in Sony studios, which is huge for a high school student. So there are other ways to make partnerships that don't always come down to the dollars, just to make sure that if the goal is to give these students an experience where arts is a part of their lives, and they see the value of it, and it's actually helping their social emotional development, it's actually helping their mental health, then this is a way to do it, so that the district doesn't always feel like everything comes down to money. There's so much more that can be done that doesn't come down to just the dollars, even though the dollars are a big part of it. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Summer. So helpful. You can just see in the chat box how many people feel that way. And we have several questions coming in for you, so we'll pick those up at the end. But right now, I want to turn things over to my colleague, Caitlin Lanoff, who's Program and Communications Manager at the Alliance, and she is going to walk you through the 3 remaining elements of the Alliance Toolkit.
Thanks, Adelaide, and thanks, Summer. That was really wonderful and an amazing perspective for the people on the call. I had a longer presentation planned, but to honor the time that you guys should get for Q&A, I'm gonna skip through some slides. So Cordelia, I'm gonna just sort of move real quickly through stuff. Can you share the PowerPoint? Thank you. So the next few slides I'll be sharing will be social media tips, our op-ed template, and engaging youth voice and advocacy. I was going to give you a breakdown of platforms. Again, like I mentioned, I'm just going to fly through that stuff. So if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. With most of us safer at home, social media is the perfect vehicle to broadcast and amplify your advocacy. You can connect with folks doing similar work. And take some of the effort out of creating unique messaging. So if social media feels super overwhelming, you can just tap into other organizations that are already advocating and rebroadcast, repost, retag, share their work until you get comfortable and familiar. It's also a great way to build community and create partnerships. As we just saw, Summer is an incredible person who is working really hard in our district to make sure that students are getting equitable access to education. Because of this, you want to stay positive in your messaging. Oftentimes, these are people who are working under, as we've discussed, severe budget cuts, and things are really hard right now. That doesn't mean that you can't call out wrongs that need to be corrected, but there's a way that you can say it that creates a connection and not a disconnect. So think about how you would approach that person in person and make sure that your communications reflect that. Here is where I was gonna really go in depth into our different platforms. So really quickly, the 3 ones we'll be focusing on are Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Twitter is great for information sharing and joining a larger conversation. You may find your district already has Twitter handles, and you can @ them, tag them, retweet them, join their conversation. The important takeaway here is oftentimes a lot of people will create their own new hashtags, and that can be problematic because you're just sort of like adrift in a sea of your own creativity, which is great. But to join a larger conversations, you want to include hashtags that are already part of a larger conversation. So arts ed, arts equity, arts education, arts education now. These hashtags are already in play, and you can join those conversations by including those hashtags. So Facebook, most of us are pretty familiar with as a storytelling and community building platform. It's a great place for calls to action. Again, sharing other people's content and creating a really strong online community. Oftentimes your school already has a Facebook page, and you can bring arts education into that community and with your advocacy work, and also create a similar platform for arts education organizations and advocates in your area. Instagram is great if you have tons of images or short videos. This is a great place to share student artwork or teachers' lesson plans. This can really broadcast your work and be a great platform for an online gallery. Again, you want to tag community members, organizations, and other people, teachers, students, making sure that they're getting credit for the work. It's a great place for campaign visuals. Create California has a lot of resources around this that are great to amplify your messaging. So in short, you want to pick a platform that plays to your strengths. Again, like if you're like, Twitter feels really overwhelming, don't have to worry about it right now. You can go to Facebook. If you're already really strong on Instagram and you're an artist or a teacher that has a lot of materials, you can use Instagram. You want to stay positive when you're posting, especially when you're tagging somebody, and you can amplify your message by friending, tagging, and sharing similar messaging. So next up is our op-ed template. Similar to social media, this has been mentioned a bunch. You want to make sure that you are staying positive. It's a great way to create that connection to the press. If you've created that connection, then they can they can amplify your advocacy for you. And it goes a long way to educate the community at large on the importance of arts education and what's at risk if we lose it. It also opens up new avenues for connecting to local advocates. So people who maybe are not so familiar with the issue, but then read about it in the paper, recognize that this is something that they want to be a part of, and they can reach out to you that way as well. You want to make sure that you're taking the time to personalize your op-ed, as discussed. It's community specific, so make sure that you are plugging in the proposed cuts if there are any. Let the community know what's coming and what's to lose. It's a great place to provide examples of community members who have used the arts at home to create connection to the students or other community members. And it's a great way to convey that the arts are an indispensable tool on the road to recovery. So we're talking a lot about social emotional learning. This is a great place to include that to the community at large. I also recommend that you refer back to the Alliance's talking points that Adelaide mentioned for additional content there. All right, my favorite, engaging youth voice and advocacy. I just want to say that the design of the toolkit was created by a student through the Student Voice, which is a nationwide platform, and helped us develop this particular tool. So oftentimes the inclusion of students is overlooked when creating local advocacy teams. That is a strong negative when you're talking about a community. You want to make sure that you are including that community in the conversation. This would have been a great place for a student presentation if you're thinking about how to get students involved, but for now you'll have me. Student voice is critical when thinking about systematic change. The efforts, student and adult partnerships can amplify efforts by identifying key issues directly related to students, fostering intergenerational learning, building a shared strategy, and creating long-term meaningful change with community buy-in. So if your students are on board and they're advocating with you and they want to see the changes that are happening, they will be your strongest allies. And school board members are often taken aback by not knowing what students actually want to see change, and including them in the conversation can oftentimes create faster change than without. Okay, some promising practices. So oftentimes we're like, well, I don't know any students, or I don't have students in the district, or I'm not directly connected to students. So there are a lot of ways that you can address this through social media posts, getting the call out there and seeing who responds. Oftentimes there are students already involved in civic engagement, and they would be open to bringing arts equity into the conversation as well. Teachers can be a great connection there. If they teach a civics class or know students that are familiar with advocacy, then they can suggest students to you. Be solution-oriented. So partnerships should be, and this is true for all of your advocacy work, partnerships should be focused on innovative solutions to the problems raised, not necessarily on the problems themselves, right? We don't want to just say like, these are things that are wrong. We want to say, okay, these are the things that we want to fix, and here are the tools and strategies we can use to implement, to correct them. Thank you, Cordelia. You're doing awesome. Meaningful engagement is empathizing with the student experience while seeing students as partners who can provide invaluable insights and information. So it's not just, you're welcome to the conversation and we feel really sorry for what's going on, but having them directly involved and creating an equal partnerships that are established on trust and equity can really move the conversation forward. So in short, we don't want to be this guy, right? you've been included in this conversation, but we're not actually letting you change anything. So students need to be as equal of a partner in the conversation as any of your other partners when you think about creating your team. Woo! That is it. We can open up to Q&A now.
Thank
Great.
you so much. Caitlin.
I'm so sorry, Adelaide. I just realized before we open up to Q&A, I just wanted to do a quick drop a link in with a quick next step piece because I forgot to do it at the end of my presentation. So apologies for interrupting. But we, again, as we've just said, this work is ongoing, it's hyper local, and it really is dependent on everyone on this call getting involved in their community. You guys are so, I mean, I'm looking at everyone who's chiming in. This is just an incredible wealth of knowledge. We really need you guys to stay in touch with us and to take the next step as part of a larger coalition to be solutions oriented and to make sure every student has access to the arts instruction that we know makes a life-changing difference for them. So to do that, we've created a quick form that if you can fill out to sort of stay in touch with us, that would be great. It's 2 questions, it's your name, it's your email, and it just, all it says is, yes, I'm willing to take the next step. I wanna be contacted by you guys when there is a big campaign or action alert or some way for me to get involved. I wanna be involved. And so it's just a way for us to capture that information of those folks who are willing to take the next step with us and potentially the next step with us to ensure that we harness the full power of the arts in addressing the public health crisis that has changed all of our lives. So Caitlin just dropped it into the chat. And it's also on the resources page at Arts for LA. Please, please take 2 minutes to fill it out. This is how we will be in touch with you, reach out to you and say, hey, this is happening at the state level, please take action. Or, hey, this is happening at this district. Do you have 5 minutes to lend a hand to your fellow arts advocate over here? We really appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your willingness to take action with us. So that's all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cordelia. Can you pop that resources page back up there? Thank you. I just want to tell everyone and assure everyone that you will receive all of these resources, all of the links, everything, I promise. We're getting lots of questions, making sure that we're recording the webinar and that you'll receive that recording, and then we'll compile a really beautiful list of all these links that have been shared. I want to highlight just 2 quickly. Cordelia mentioned already, Create California, truly a wealth of resources on this site. I saw Leda popped in the chat the link previously and mentioned that there are really incredibly strong communications materials. So just thinking about what Caitlin just presented about the powerful social media tools at your fingertips, please think about using the resources that Create California has created and offered to everyone. And then the next is ed100.org. And there's a lot of helpful information there about the role of school boards, what kind of decisions they make, how they're elected, that kind of thing. It's just the public school system is complicated, and that's a really great place to go if you have a question about how something works. So great, thanks. Okay, so Cordelia, if you pull up our next step slide. Great. We are now going to get into Q&A, and I want to say we have a lot of questions. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but if there have been questions echoed by multiple people, we will try to roll it up in our follow-up email. Something like that. We want to make sure that as many of these questions get answered. So let's start with, so this is a question to our panelists. Who should be a part of your community team? Arts organizations and who else? Want to take that one, Cordelia?
Absolutely, it's a great question. So who should be part of your community team? And this is tricky for a lot of folks who work for the district can't necessarily be involved in advocacy around some of these issues, which is a question I've seen pop up as well. So you do have to think critically and carefully about who can be involved sort of formally and sort of the external public facing work, and who can really strategize and help you find, as Tom said, I love this phrase, the power of the particular, and as Summer articulated really beautifully, like the solution. So maybe someone's involved in a conversation about the grants for funding arts integration training over the summer around distance learning, but they can't necessarily go to a meeting and speak right? So I think it's thinking strategically about who can help, where, and how. In terms of your organizing team, the sort of more external facing piece of it, I think you're exactly right. You want to think about arts organizations, right? So is there a local sort of organization like doing arts booster work, right? Is there a city council person who's really excited about the arts and really believes deeply in it? Is there a, you know, again, a sort of principle might be tricky, but there could be a your community-based arts organizations that are doing programming in the schools are going to be incredibly important allies as well. And those are folks who are probably working in the schools, maybe have connections to students, as Caitlin mentioned, so can get student voice involved as well. So I'd take a good look at the list of community-based organizations that are also partnering with school districts to provide arts instruction. And that would be sort of my immediate go-to. If there are educators who feel comfortable or are able to be part of that coalition, external or maybe sort of internal conversation, then they're incredibly important resources because they're, you know, on the ground. So I hope that's helpful. If anyone else wants to jump in and add anything I missed. But again.
That was great. Thank you so much, Cordelia. Okay, Summer, I have a question for you very pertinent to this current moment we live in. So the virtual school board meetings create more challenges for public comment. Any best practices out there?
It's interesting because our school board and some of our members are on this meeting right now. So I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Kelly Kent and Miss Anna Lair. I know two of my colleagues are on with us right now. We actually had a workshop where we had to discuss how we would run our school board meetings because it is a challenge. We, as a board, we did not want to jeopardize the public's ability to make comments and to keep it as close to how we do it in person as possible because that is the public's right. But different school boards, we looked at different methods that other school districts were using, and some only relied on written comment. Some you had to go through their executive assistant. And so you do have to do a little bit of research and figure out right now in the time of the distance school board meetings, which method they're using. And once you, if they're not allowing for public comment where you can actually read your own comments, I would really encourage you to not only email the board, like I said, before the meeting, but email the board after the meeting. Make sure that you listen to, make sure that they've actually read your public comment, or if they paraphrase that, you know, it's as close to your messaging as possible, which is why we wanted to make sure that our members, the members of the public for our meetings are able to speak on their own, because we know that there's emotion in some of the public comments, and we really want the public to be able to translate that in their own way. So I would just do some research and find out what the different methods the different school districts are using for public comment, and rely on making sure that you follow up with the email so that your message is clearly heard by the board.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Summer. All right, our next question is from an elementary music teacher, and they ask, how do I motivate my fellow music teachers to become active advocates?
I'm including a link here for the CMEA, California Music Education Association. So I would contact your art-specific organization to see what their advocacy efforts are, so that you can bring that into the work that you're doing. So that's in the chat box.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Okay, this is another question for you, Summer, a longer one. So Summer, many arts advocates talk about using Title I funding for arts, but in my experience, school leaders are hesitant to use these funds for the arts. Can you speak to this and why that may be, so we can strategize better around speaking around this funding possibility?
Okay, so Title I funds typically go to schools that have a higher percentage of low-income students, so they rely on the information from the free or reduced numbers at a school site for them to get additional funding to address the achievement and opportunity gap for students who come from lower income backgrounds. And so when site administrators get additional funding specifically for low-income families, it is a challenge on how to spend those funds, because you do want to see an impact in the experiences of those students directly, even though sometimes the Title I funds are used to purchase curricula that all of the students at that location are able to benefit from. The goal is to use the Title I funds to ensure that there is an equitable experience for students who come from, who are, for our low-income students. I would say, in short, the challenge for a lot of administrators, and this is not a judgment against them, but they just don't know how to integrate, how to use Title I funds strategically to provide arts integration. It just may come down to their inability to understand how arts can be used, or what programs can be used for student learning and mastery, or for the family engagement, because Title I funds can be used for family engagement, because we know that there's a connection to, the students that are coming from lower income families, to be able to also have their families be a part of their learning experience. So there's a great website that I had to look up, because I haven't looked at it for a while, but I had a conversation with the principal at my elementary school, well, not the current one, but a previous principal, and it's title1arts.org. And there are some useful tools and resources on that website. There's some evidence-based information, so you can actually help the site administrators know how to be creative and still comply with the Title I obligations or regulations for using those funds to bring in more arts to support the students who benefit from the Title I funding. So it's title1, the number 1, arts.org. And I hope it's helpful.
Thank you so much, Summer. Caitlin read my mind and already had that link in the chat box. And thank you, Summer, for mentioning that the Title I Arts Initiative is actually a project of the California Alliance for Arts Education. And it has this separate website, like you mentioned, and that link is in the chat box and will be sent out in our emails. Okay, our next question. Let's see, sorry, everybody. Okay, how can the Alliance and this toolkit help build better stakeholder engagement between school districts and the public throughout the LCAP and LCFF process?
I just have one thought for that. It's important to remember that even here, with me here now in this capacity, I am really speaking to you as a parent, not as a school board member, because school boards have to function as a unit. And even though my colleagues are here and we're sort of sharing in this together, a lot of what I'm saying is coming from, my own personal experiences and my own opinions about the arts and how important they are. And it's important to remember that school board members are individuals and they represent the public. And not in a way that becomes adversarial, but it's important to remind school board members that we don't work for the district. We actually work for the public. We are the representatives who are, we've been given this opportunity to bring the issues that are important to the public to the school environment. And so I think it's helpful to sort of have that reminder and treat it like it can be a true partnership with the elected officials representing the interests and needs of the public that they serve, so that we can all make our school environment better for our students. And so I think that's one way, just having that reminder that public officials, the public elected officials actually do represent the public. We are the public. And many times you do have school board members who have children in the district, or who have children, period, in some school somewhere. And you sort of appeal to that more personal side of them, of being a person who has a child, who cares about children, and who understands that all children love art, and we want to celebrate that thing that our children naturally gravitate towards, because we know that that's going to make their educational experience better.
Thank you, Summer. Any additions to that, or should we keep going? Okay, I'll keep going. All right, we have a question. Tom touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but I'm interested in hearing the degree to which we arts education advocates are prioritizing broadband and universal online access for students as part of our agenda. Is it top of mind or not? Is that something you could speak to, Tom?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to my points early on that we want to be really clear that we understand school board members have some really big challenges before them. And clearly, if students are doing distance learning, perhaps in some districts, it looks like for the entirety of the coming school year, the ability to deliver a high quality arts education is only going to be as good as every student having access to technology. So I think it's important that when we craft advocacy messages, we incorporate those realities that school board members are facing and that we understand what resources are being dedicated to bridging the digital divide. We do know Superintendent Thurmond has a digital divide task force that is going to be coming out with some recommendations across the state for districts to make sure we are doing our best to bridge that divide. And I think it would behoove us to be advocates for that work and to make sure that that's a priority given as we are adapting to distance learning. I met with our colleagues at the 4 statewide teacher associations in the 4 artistic disciplines just last night, and adapting to music education, visual art education, theater, dance, creative writing to an online format has many challenges, and teachers are facing those challenges on the day-to-day level. And so not just making sure that the technology and broadband is made available to students, but then also supporting those credentialed teachers to being able to adapt their curriculum. And so I think for those of you who are parenting at home and homeschooling, I think it's very real how challenging that can be. And I think it's very important that we're both patient, but also allied with those people who are working to bridge the digital divide and making sure that we don't compete with those potential resources that are going out to make sure that every student has access to technology from home.
Great, thank you, Tom. Okay, I think for our last question, we'll take a sort of logistical one about the letter to school board members template. And this was a question about should that letter be addressed only to school board members or also to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent? And are there any other school leaders that it might make sense to address that letter to? Maybe Summer, would you mind answering that one since you would be the recipient of this letter in theory?
Sure. I think to send the letter directly to the school board members initially would be the better idea. Superintendents and cabinet, they have so much that they're figuring out, and the way it's broken down, school boards come up with the what, and district employees, administrators come up with the how. And when you want to advocate for that conversation to start, you can go directly to the school board members. You don't have to bring the superintendents and the administrators into that conversation, because if there's a decision to be made about if that conversation is going to be had, it's really up to the board members. If the board members want that conversation to be agendized, it's going to come from them, not really the superintendent or the administrators. But once public comment has been made, it would be helpful to, the follow-up email can be sent to everyone, because at that point, they've all heard your comments, they all know what you're advocating for, and it becomes something that's on the radar of the superintendent and the administrators, because they know this may be something that the board is now going to move towards wanting to have a more robust discussion about. But that initial contact, it's okay to make it directly to the board, because it's up to the board to follow up and say, yes, we're interested in pursuing this or having a more involved discussion about it. So the initial contact can go directly to the board.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Summer. And we are at time, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to again promise you that all of these resources and a recording of this training, you'll receive it as a follow-up email. And it will also be posted on the Alliance website at artsed411.org/toolkit. Thank you, Summer, so much for being here. It was a privilege to have you join us. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was really my honor.
Thank you so much. And if you haven't already, sign up using that Google form so we can all carry this work forward together.